Welcome to Bluegrass Brooklyn, our podcast all about the music we love, straight from the Bluegrass borough of Brooklyn, New York.
I'm okay to take the wheel while you draw so near. The time to rediscover and to trust. We need this ride.
Okay, Season 2, Episode 4. I'm your host, Mike Wilner. Today we're speaking with Chris Jones, noted Sirius XM DJ on the Bluegrass Junction station, frontman for Chris Jones and the Night Drivers, and maybe most notably, Brooklyn native. So we're going to get to talk to him about all kinds of stuff. Before we dive in, please remember to follow us at Bluegrass Brooklyn on Instagram. Brooklyn is spelled BKLYN, or the Bluegrass Brooklyn Facebook group. And if you're interested in finding jams all over Manhattan and the Bronx and Riverdale, go to bluegrassjamsnearme.com. Okay, let's roll. Okay, everybody, Liz and I are here with Chris Jones, longtime bluegrass musician, also Sirius XM DJ on the Bluegrass Junction channel, as well as several of the country channels. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mike. It's really nice of you to have me. It's good to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you, Jones.
Pleasure.
So, whatever possessed you to leave Brooklyn, New York?
I'm still asking myself that question. My mother decided to move up north, up in Rockland County first when I was about 8 years old. And then I moved a whole lot of different places from there on, including New Mexico. I spent a fair amount of time. It was out there that I got really serious about playing bluegrass music. I ended up in Chicago for 4 years playing a Special Consensus, which was my first full-time bluegrass job. And from there back east to Pennsylvania, then I was up in New England and then back out in the Southwest and in Nashville for almost 20 years. And,
Wow.
And now I'm really far away in Western Canada. So yeah, but at the age that I left Brooklyn, I wasn't really old enough to have a major say in the decisions.
What was your pathway to music? Did you start as a kid?
Yeah, I started as a kid, and people say, "Oh, were your parents musicians?" And interestingly, they weren't. My uncle, however, was a bluegrass musician, a banjo player. So I got some of that directly from him. And then my dad was just very passionate about music. He liked all kinds, but he was more on the jazz end. When I was little, he was a bartender at the Five Spot in New York. He was a bartender back when Thelonious Monk was playing there on a regular basis, and Charles Mingus and some of these people. So I got introduced to that music early on. And then my stepmother, who was a big country music and bluegrass fan and had pretty good record collection. And so I got into it that way, listening to Flatt and Scruggs and Monroe and Doc Watson. I got a guitar for Christmas, I think, when I was about 10 or 11. By the time I was 14, I was getting pretty serious about playing, consumed with it, immersed myself in the music completely. But at that point, never thought about going into it professionally. But like I say, I just absorbed a whole lot of it and then got serious about playing, and here I am.
So did you have another profession you were like headed towards and wound up detouring to music, or was just straight in?
Well, I wasn't really sure where I was heading, and music was really the thing that was dominant. And once I figured that out as well, I better see about doing this full time and see how it works out. I also had the radio interest at the same time, kind of on a parallel path. I went to the University of Vermont, and I was actually an animal science major. I was working on the university farm, actually helped to pay my way through school, so I was milking cows at the time. But while I was there, I got to know the bluegrass community up there, and my first professional gig happened at that time, just as a rhythm guitar player backing up some French-Canadian musicians doing that kind of music. And then my first bluegrass gig was when I was up in Vermont. There was a long-running band up there called Banjo Dan and the Midnight Plowboys. back when we didn't have cell phones and didn't have ways to look each other up, how people found each other is always kind of interesting. So I was walking along the street in Burlington, Vermont, and this guy pulls over in a car and he said, "Hey, are you Chris Jones?" I said, "Yeah, I've been looking for you. I want you to fill in on this gig that we have." That was Willie Lindner of Banjo Dan. So that was my first paid bluegrass gig.
Wow.
So while I was sort of going down a different path, I wasn't very convinced that that was the right path. But I did start my radio work there too, and that ended up being very important.
Yeah, really. Tell me a little bit about your time with Special Consensus, because that's a headline band.
I'd been playing part-time. My first bluegrass band was New York-based, a band called Horse Country. And Barry Mitterhoff was part of that band. It was a really great way to start, and Bob Mavian was the band leader, and he had really trained me well. He was a really good mentor. But I was ready to give it a try full time, and Greg Cahill, Special Consensus, answered an ad that I ran, the Bluegrass Unlimited Classifieds. I was in New York, and at the time he called me up, and I couldn't really afford to fly out to Chicago, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to audition. But I was taking a train from New York out to Albuquerque, and I said, "I've got a long layover in Chicago, and I'm coming through there in a couple of weeks." And so Greg picked me up at the station, and they auditioned me on my train layover. Years later, I ended up writing a song about that train because it was the Southwest Chief, because I wrote it a lot. So I had everything I had in the car and moved to Chicago and joined those guys, and it was a great experience. At that time, Special Consensus played more Chicago-based stuff. I mean, we're on the road too, but in the month of January, they played 21 days in a row, some days double booked.
Wow.
So talk about immersion. The band was super busy on the road. We played a bunch of Texas back then and all over the place, but then a lot of Chicago area stuff. So yeah, it was really good. Then my first time in the recording studio was with them, and an album that's now obscure and out of print. Yeah, I was 21 when I made that move.
Wow.
All I keep thinking about through this is how much you are willing to not have comfort so you could be a bluegrass musician, right? You could put all your stuff in the car and 21 days in a row, and it just seems like the music is more important than having a job that I go to every day with a steady paycheck.
I think that's the decision that most musicians who play this music and play other music at some point have to make. Yeah, how comfortable do you want to be? I've often joked that the definition of success, and at least in bluegrass music, keeping your fame and income level just one step ahead of your growing fussiness. I mean, at the age of 21, of course, unattached, I was okay with discomfort. But I do think that, even later on, the rigors of traveling and being in less than ideal circumstances is something that if people aren't able to deal with that, generally, it's not a good field to be in on a full-time basis.
As my late sainted Uncle Willie used to say, if you want all the comforts of home, stay home.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Chris, I love the music and listen to the show, talk about that in a bit, but you're a talented songwriter, and I'm interested in your process because some of us take wild steps at songwriting and come out with various results. Do you have a method that you go from point A to B, or is it just a light bulb goes off, or some mixture of the above?
Yeah, it's some mixture. I think for me, storing the ideas somewhere, I'm not very good at just going into a room and, this is kind of what happens in Nashville. People co-write and they have an appointment time. And I'm not very good at going from a blank slate and just writing something. But as I get ideas, I like to stay open for inspiration all the time and make sure that I write that down. And nowadays it's kind of handy. You can record musical ideas, melodic ideas, on a phone or something, some portable something. That's important for me, some kind of inspiration and idea, so it's not coming out of a vacuum. But I do have times too, especially for recordings, that, we really use an up-tempo song and in the key of A. Sometimes we'll focus that way, but definitely writing some ideas down and going back to that. And then sometimes melodic ideas, I will just or scat sing into a device just to hold on. And that's been really useful, and I have definitely written songs incorporating that stuff.
So let's change the focus a moment to an area that I'm very interested in, which is jamming. What's the jamming scene like? Is there any jammers out there you can play with?
Not where I live, because I'm in a pretty remote area. I don't know a single other bluegrass musician anywhere close by. There's some jams that go on in Edmonton. There's an active organization there, and also in Calgary. I'm a 5-hour drive from Edmonton, so I'm not very plugged into the jamming scene. And most of the jamming that I personally do usually takes place connected to a festival of some kind where I run into other musicians and say, hey, let's pick. So there's definitely active stuff in Alberta. I'm just not close to it. So yeah, I miss out on that. That is certainly a thing I miss about the time. I lived in Nashville for almost 20 years. So having that available, but I came up here over 15 years ago. But I travel from here and travel throughout the US with my band, which is scattered around. And so I get my jamming time in. My last jam session was at the Spigma in Nashville, which is this big event that happens at the end of January there. There's one room I always gravitate to, which we call the Southern Ohio room, but there's some people from the Cincinnati area that usually have an endless jam session going on there. So whatever I'm doing there, I go and hang out and pick some with them.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so here's my question for you. I want to know, do you have a jam-ecdote you can tell us? Some fun or interesting or unusual experience you ever had at a jam?
I recall a time at a bluegrass festival, the great fiddle player Art Stamper was there. He's a guy that played with the Stanley Brothers and with all sorts of great musicians through the years, and Red Allen. But some people are like this. They never lose their love of just playing the music under any circumstances. And he loved fiddle tunes. He knew a million of them. And so we ended up just jamming and playing tunes that he would call and not name, but he would play them. And that kind of took me back to my early days of playing with other people, was really being just a rhythm guitar player behind fiddle tunes. It was just an impromptu thing, outdoor festival.
That's the roots, right? That's this. I mean, there is obviously a distinction between performing and jamming, but this is where it all comes from. It's just being together.
So I just want to shift topics. I became familiar with your work, hearing it on Sirius XM, which is stuck on Bluegrass Junction. No, I haven't.
Great.
I listen to all three kinds of music: bluegrass, country, and Western swing. So,
Perfect. Yeah, great.
So basically, those are the three things that are on my Sirius XM. So what's the pathway? How did you wind up as a host on Sirius?
I had on-the-job training, and I started out at the University of Vermont, their radio station, and everything was kind of wide open there. I was given a time slot, and I did a mixture of bluegrass and country music and some Irish stuff, and it was a mixed bag. And that was my first experience about, trying to make transitions from one kind of sound to another. Years later, after I'd played with Special Consensus, I was in a band called Whetstone Run, which was based in State College, Pennsylvania. The band leader was a guy, Lee Olson, and Lee hosted a radio show once a week at a little country station there in State College. And I became the co-host, because I told him I had a little radio background. And then that station ended up hiring me to do some of their regular time slots. And I said, I've never done commercial radio before, and never been a country DJ. And he said, oh, it's easy. Just, keep the music going and read the weather and do this. And they were desperate. They'd had 2 people out sick. And so this opportunities sometimes happen. It's when they're desperate for somebody. So I ended up working at a radio station in the Nashville area. But it had always been very part-time, because I was always playing music. I was always on the road, and you can't hold down 5 days a week on the air. We're traveling. Terry Hurd, who's one of the major bluegrass syndicators, I had done some work for him, got to know him. He moved to Nashville from Oregon, and I did some filling in for him and recorded some little advertising spots and things for him. He ended up getting hired when Sirius satellite radio started up, and they wanted a bluegrass channel. And they didn't know anybody involved in the business, so they just sort of looked at this list of people with syndicated radio shows, and his name came up. He at that time, I think, had more stations than anybody else, so they called him, and he took it on. And then he was given the assignment to hire other people on the air, so he turned to me right away, and I said, do you want to do this? I said, well, I'm traveling. Well, this is you can do your stuff in advance if you're going on the road, and you'll be doing it from your own studio. So that's how it happened. And that was over 20 years ago. Because of, busy playing music, I haven't had an ambition to climb within that world or be able to become a program director, because I don't actually want that. So I just kind of do my thing, somewhat under the radar perhaps, but I've been at it a long time now.
Yeah, I just want to comment that as a listener, the image, in my mind at least, of you're inside your hollowed out volcano with boom mics everywhere and minions scurrying around. But in fact, it's a little less dramatic, isn't it?
Well, exactly. I'm set up to do shows from the road, and I'll do shows backstage or I'm playing and things like that. It gets a little hectic sometimes on the road, but when home, I broadcast out of a home studio in Alberta, and it's a glorified office, but I'm set up with everything I need. If I've got something that's working well for me, I keep it as is and don't mess with it too much. So I've been operating with the same microphone for quite some time, and I get a chance to listen when things repeat on the air, and I get a chance to hear it. And at the moment, I'm happy with what's happening with the audio. In fact, I actually like it better than sometimes when I'm in the studios at the headquarters. But I've been doing it a while and tweaking things to where, the sound is working for me.
Yeah, it sure is. So shifting back to music, in the 90s, I think it is, you formed Night Drivers.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about how that band came together and what's been the experience.
Well, I'd been a sideman at that point for going on 15 years. I had played with Special Consensus. I mentioned Whetstone Run. I also played in the Lynn Morris Band and played in an acoustic country band called the McCarters. And I had done all that. And in all of these bands, I tended to be the lead singer and the songwriter, or the person who was arranging the songs. So I thought, well, given that, I should go ahead and put my own band together. And my thinking was mainly not that I wanted the top billing, it was that I wanted to have a say about the travel and have some control over that part of it, but also just to have the longevity. If I've got my name attached to something, if people leave, their personnel changes, I don't have to start over. So my experience when Weary Hearts split up in Nashville, I thought, I've got to start this all over again and build a reputation for a brand new band. I thought, well, if I'm building that reputation, let me build my own so that I can have that longevity.
Right. And you guys have been around for quite a while. You're still touring and playing, right?
Oh, yeah.
At the risk of announcing something which may have already occurred, when is your next tour, or what have you got on for Night Drivers now?
Well, we've got shows coming up, and then we're actually going into the studio and finishing up a new album. We do all of our recording in Western North Carolina and Asheville, where our record company, Mountain Home, is based. So we've got a few things going on, the East and Midwest, and busy time ahead. Something I always look forward to in May. Most years we play the festival that was started by Ralph Stanley back in 1970. It's now called the Hills of Home Bluegrass Festival, but it's at the Stanley Brothers home place in Southwest Virginia in Dickinson County. So we play that over the Memorial Day weekend, playing there on the Friday of that weekend. That's a great experience to go back to where the Stanley Brothers are from. Just that historic festival has been going over 50 years. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
So where's the website or whatever access point the listeners can get to?
ChrisJonesGrass.com. A lot of Chris Joneses, so I always tell people to find a website or to find me on social media. If you just add grass to my name, that will help. So ChrisJonesGrass.com, and there's a tour dates page. You can find out where we're going to be and get some information too, and get some links to music and things like that.
That's exciting. So I wanted to leave with one last question. Favorite bluegrass guitar player?
Oh, well, you've asked me a tough one because I like so many of them. I started out being a Doc Watson fanatic, and I still am.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the guitar player who influenced me the most, if I had to pick one over the years, I would have to say Larry Sparks. Always was really drawn to that bluesy style, but he also had that kind of Stanley Brothers background since he started with them. And so if I had to put my finger on one person who was the biggest influence, but there are so many, it's hard to name them all. But love Doc Watson, love Tony Rice. I never tried to go down the path of playing like Tony Rice because there are a lot of people doing that. And Norman Blake, I'm a big fanatic of Norman's music. Yeah, lots to mention. So yeah, tough question.
So any words of wisdom or advice for the would-be Chris Jones next out of the gate?
I think just always keep working on the music. And nowadays, I think in the era of social media and self-promoting, people have a tendency to think that that's the most important thing, getting your name out there and creating so-called content. I think you can get overly caught up in that and forget that the main thing is to make good music, make it your own, use all those influences, and then let it be your personal thing and develop that and work on it. And that's more important than any exposure or self-promotion you can do.
Sage advice. So we assume that you've maintained your Brooklyn citizenship.
Oh,
so
yes.
When you find your way back down here, we really hope to get a chance to meet and maybe even play together.
That would be wonderful. I have lately made it a mission to get back there once a year if I can. I went many years without visiting. So yeah, you will find me in the area before long.
Fantastic. So
you're going to create a whole new bluegrass family.
Oh, that's wonderful. So glad to hear that.
Chris Jones, singer, songwriter, band leader, host of XM, and more importantly, Brooklynite. Thank you very much for taking time with us today. A real pleasure to get to meet you.
Well, thanks, Liz and Mike, and I really appreciate you having me. This was a lot of fun.
I'm so grateful to get a chance to speak with Chris. Fascinating guy, lots of interesting points, and I hope we get to see him again on the show soon. Before we go, I'd like to mention a few upcoming events. On Sunday, June 8th, world-famous legendary mandolinist Andy Statman and his trio called Andy's Ramble Bluegrass Band is appearing at Delia's Lounge. That's at 93rd Street and 3rd Avenue in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Go to deliaslounge.com, make some reservations because I think this one's going to be crowded. On June 21st, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Governor's Island in the lovely New York Harbor, Porch Stomp, a day of music and joy. Remember to drop by the Bluegrass Brooklyn stage to listen to some of our performers. We look forward to seeing you there. Okay, well, we hope you enjoyed the show. We're looking forward to our next show. And we look forward to seeing you around the Jam Circle.
And then I put my pen to paper. I guess I don't have that much to say, but you should know that I've been